Well, it is great to see everyone this fine morning. This shouldn't come as a shock to any of us, but our society promotes promiscuity. It doesn't just permit promiscuity. It doesn't just kind of sort of allow promiscuity. It actively pushes us to be promiscuous. And you see it all over the place. And on top of that, our society encourages lust. It encourages people to involve themselves in having wandering eyes, to, as it were, see the grass as being greener on the other side of the fence, as the saying goes. And, of course, we as Christians, we know that that's not who we should be. We shouldn't be people who are involved in promiscuity. We shouldn't be people who are involved in lust. But we are absolutely steeped in that culture. It is surrounding us like crazy, not just in media, but in our interactions with other people. The mindset of the people that we interact with are these mindsets of promoting promiscuity and encouraging lust. So what are we to do? Well, today, as we're continuing our sermon series about possessing your vessel in sanctification, today's sermon is going to be about avoiding the seducer. Now, we'll be looking at Proverbs chapters 5 and chapter 7. And in those chapters, we're first going to see the wiles of the seducer. We're then going to see avoiding the snare. And finally, we're going to talk about righteous exhilaration. And what we're going to see as we go through this is that we must exercise self-control over our thoughts, over our mind, over what we fantasize about, so that we can stay faithful to God and to our spouse. So, with that having been said, I do want to give a very slight caveat that some of this stuff is a little uncomfortable to talk about. Some of this stuff are things that we don't necessarily always like discussing. But society pushes these things so hard that we have to be prepared, and we have to prepare our children for how to deal with these subjects. So, with that in mind, let's talk about the wiles of the seducer. Proverbs 5, 1 through 6. Proverbs 5, 1 through 6. And in this, Solomon starts out by writing, "My son, give attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion and your lips may reserve knowledge." Now, it's important for us to note that this was written by a father to his son. Solomon is writing to his sons. So he's coming from a male perspective. He talks about the harlot, the female seducer. However, the lessons apply equally both to men and women. Whether we're talking about a male seducer or a female seducer, whether we're talking about a male being seduced or a female being seduced, the lessons are the same. So this is applicable whether we are a man or a woman, whether you are a man or a woman. There we go. We don't change. You are individual. He goes on. He says, "For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword." So we read this, and I've read this passage hundreds of times. You've probably read this passage hundreds of times. And we see it, it's so clear and obvious that sometimes it feels like much of this is so obvious that it goes without saying. And so we don't say it. We don't talk about it. We don't expound on it. But then there's a problem. Because it goes unsaid, people go unprepared. And it was a real shock to my system when I first got into ministry and I started talking, especially young people who'd grown up in the church. And they were shocked that there were seducers out there. They would get hoodwinked. Someone would seduce them. They'd say the right things, and then this young Christian would get hurt. They'd get manipulated into a bad situation, and they'd be utterly shocked that there was anybody out there who was so dishonest to be a seducer. So while it feels like these things should be so obvious that they go unsaid, when they go unsaid, people go unprepared. So let's prepare ourselves for what we face. So let's talk about how the seducer uses their speech. It said in the text that the seducer's like the words of the seducer are like honey and smooth oil. So what does the seducer do? Well, they compliment. You know, making you feel good. They flatter. Okay, what's the difference between a compliment and a flattery? Well, compliment is about something that is tangible. Hey, you look good today. Flattery is something that is not so tangible. You're the most beautiful woman in the world. Okay, well, that's not really measurable. It's not necessarily true. And they promise. Now, here's the difficult part about this. Someone who truly admires you and wants to build you up and loves you, what will they do? Well, compliment, flatter, and promise, right? So this gets hard, because at the beginning, sometimes the seducer sounds almost like they're legitimate. But notice what the text says. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. So let's examine that speech again, but in light of the seducer. The seducer, they compliment, but their compliments are hollow. They're meaningless. They're empty. And you can see this when they start talking to you, expounding on your qualities, your character, your dress, or whatever, but it ends up not really being all that true, and overinflating the truth. And their flattery is empty. It doesn't have any real substance. It's designed to manipulate. And their promises will never be fulfilled. They make these promises that then they have no plans of fulfilling. So what we see in this is that the seducer uses their speech to get what they want from you. They're manipulative. They will say whatever it takes to get what they want. Your money, some sexual act, your time, whatever it may be. And they'll do this by any means, regardless of the damage they cause you. See, seducers, they end up being abusers. They hurt people. And they don't care that they cause damage. Goes on and he says, her feet go down to death, her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life, her ways are unstable. She does not know it. Look at that, what it says, she does not ponder the path of life. You see, the seducer does not care what pleases God. They're not out to be a good, righteous person. They don't consider the spiritual results of their actions. Now, this can be a really great litmus test, as it were. Is a person a user, a seducer, or are they truly interested in a healthy long-term relationship? Well, how do they act towards spiritual matters? Someone who, even if they're not religious at the moment, if they're truly interested in building a relationship, they'll start learning about spiritual things. I know there are a few examples in this room of people who started dating a Christian who were not a Christian at the time, and they changed because they were truly interested in growing a healthy relationship. But if they're a seducer, they might show up to make you happy a couple of times, but they have no interest in growth. They have no interest in deeper learning. They do it just for the show. And then notice what it says. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable. Look at that, though. She does not know it. This is probably one of the biggest dangers of the seducer, is that the seducer thinks their actions are normal and even admirable. They are confident that what they're doing is right. There was recently a scandal on the internet of a particular person who is a seducer who got arrested, and there was a bunch of other stuff going on. But this guy who was running a brothel, essentially, was convinced and arguing that he did nothing wrong, that everything he was doing was completely fine. He was confident. He was assured. He didn't think anything he was doing was wrong. And the seducer, they'll present themselves with confidence. They'll present themselves as being in the right, and in fact, because you're not like them, you're the one who's messed up. And when someone is emotionally vulnerable, that's persuasive. See, they don't care that they're causing problems. They don't care that they're causing damage. But it's important to note, this is not a reason to pity them. Just because they don't know that they're causing problems, just because they don't care that they're causing problems, just because they think that what they're doing is normal, is not a reason to pity them. Why? Now, because the seducer is a student of human desire. They are somebody who studies desire. They're a person who knows what makes a person's blood pressure get up and makes them excited. They spend their time trying to figure out how to excite people. So with that in mind, what else does the seducer do? What other tools do they use? Well, let's look at Proverbs 7. Proverbs 7 goes through a scenario of a young person who gets seduced by the harlot. And we're going to see a list of things that the seducer does to get what they want from this other person. We see first that they make their location known. We're going to pick up the reading in verse 6. For at the window of my house I looked out through my lattice, and I saw among the naive and discerned among the youth a young man lacking sense, passing through the street near her corner, and he takes the way to her house, in the twilight, in the evening, in the middle of the night, and in the darkness. You notice something about that? That young man didn't have to ask for directions. He knew where the harlot's house was. And someone who's a seducer will make their location known. They'll advertise themselves on Facebook or at the bar or whatever. You don't have to work hard to find the seducer. They want to be found. But also notice that they target the vulnerable. The text doesn't say that she's going after the wise, mature men of the city. It says a naive youth lacking sense. Someone who is emotionally vulnerable. And emotional vulnerability doesn't just come with youth, but it might be because a person has been abused. It might be because they just came out of a bad relationship. It might be because they had a poor relationship with their parents. It may be any number of things that makes them vulnerable. And the seducer, they see the vulnerable people and they go after that person. That's who they target. And they also know what people desire. And we'll read through verses 10 through 21 as we go through this. But as you examine 10 through 21, this seductor, this harlot, she dresses in a way that entices his desire. She speaks in a way that entices his desire. She presents the scenario in a way that entices his desire. And the seducer will do that. They know what people desire, and they will offer what people desire. Let's see this in more detail. Verses 10 and 12, they advertise themselves. And behold, a woman comes to meet him, dressed as a harlot and cunning of heart. She is boisterous and rebellious. Her feet do not remain at home. She is now in the streets, now in the squares, and lurks by every corner. We could spend an entire sermon, or maybe series of sermons, talking about just the verse that talks about dressed like a harlot. Why do harlots dress the way they do? To entice desire. It's not about liberation. It's not about expression. It's about enticing desire. Now, male harlots just as much as a female harlot. A male seducer just as much as a female seducer. They dress, they present themselves in such a way to excite the desire of their target. But then notice what it says. That she dresses a harlot, she's boisterous, rebellious, her feet do not remain at home. Well, why don't her feet remain at home? Well, she has to get out and be advertised. A seducer will advertise themselves. And we see this today on Facebook or other social medias. Facebook, Twitter, the video site Vines or whatever, the dating apps. They put themselves out there. They advertise themselves because they are the product. Now, there's a side note here. Christians, we ought not be acting like the harlot. That's a sermon for another day. But think about it. So they advertise themselves. They also offer uninvited freebies. Verse 13, she seizes him and kisses him, and with a brazen face she says to him. He didn't ask for that kiss. He didn't invite that kiss. He didn't do anything to earn that kiss. She brazenly gives him an uninvited freebie. Why? It's like if you're fishing and you feel that nibble and you give it a little yank, right, to set that hook. She's setting the hook. She's giving him that freebie so that then he is going to follow her. And that's what the seducer does. The seducer will give an uninvited freebie. Something to catch you. And then they've got you. The seducer also will have a history of infidelity. Verses 14 through 20. Look at what she says. I was due to offer peace offerings. Today I paid my vows. Therefore I have come out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, with colored linens of Egypt. I have sprinkled my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with caresses, for my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him. At the full moon he will come home. She's obviously practiced at this. She's done this before. She has everything all prepared beforehand. And in the modern world, we'll see the seducer will have a history of broken lives behind them. A series of past boyfriends or girlfriends. A reputation of being a quote-unquote player. Whatever it may be. But you see that history of broken lives behind them. Because they are practiced at infidelity. And they're also skilled at enticement. Look at what she says there to him. For one thing, she makes it seem really personally. I came out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly, and I have found you. Oh, that makes you feel special, right? The seducer makes that person feel like they are the most important person in the world at that moment. And makes the situation look enticing. Talking about covering her bed with fine linens and perfumes. And we're not going to get caught because the husband is away. All these things show that she is skilled at enticement. And she's persistent. Verse 21 and 20 through 23. With her many persuasions she entices him. With her flattering lips she seduces him. Suddenly he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as one in fetters to the discipline of a fool, until an arrow pierces through his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, so he does not know that it will cost him his life. So with her many persuasions she entices him. See, the seducer will be persistent. They're not going to take no for an answer. They keep trying and trying. Because that whole thing about the squeaky wheel getting the oil, if they make enough noise long enough, then it wears down your resistance. And so this is what the seducer does. This is the tools that they use. These are the tools they use. See, seducers, in the end, they prey on a person's lack of self-control. That's what it is when you boil it down. They prey on a person's lack of self-control. And the imagery of the text, as a bird hastens to the snare, so he does not know that it will cost him his life. All of this is a trap. Everything the seducer does is a trap to capture people. And you think about that bird. Have you ever seen a bird get caught in a net? You have to entice them with something. You put down some sort of food, and they're too blind to see the net. And they just fly right into it and they get tangled. And when we have a lack of self-control, that seducer will prey on that lack of self-control, and we won't even see the snare that catches us. So with that in mind, how do we avoid the snare? Let's talk about avoiding the snare. Let's go to Proverbs 5, verses 7 through 14. Proverbs 5, 7 through 14. Now, again in this text, the father says, "Now then, my son, listen to me and do not depart from the words of my mouth." Okay, he's going to tell him something important, right? He's already said, pay attention to my wisdom. He's reiterating, okay, this is serious, son. Pay attention. Look what he tells him. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house. Well, that's not very complicated, is it? Keep your way far from her. You would think that there'd be more advanced, more complicated advice than that. Keep your way far from her. Again, this is one of those things that is so obvious that it seems like it shouldn't need to be said. But people get themselves in problems. So let's get more detailed about it. Let's give some modern day examples of things that we as Christians ought not do. Don't look but not touch. You've probably heard that saying from someone when they say, oh, it's okay to look, just don't touch. Don't do that. Don't even look. Stay away. Stay away from her. Don't flirt with seducers. Okay, what is flirting? Flirting is communicating in a way that is designed to excite desire. That's what flirting is. And let's face it, flirting is fun. And to be honest, flirting plays an important part in the courting process and in marriage. But its whole design is verbal foreplay. I know that sounds kind of blunt, but that's what it is. Don't flirt with the seducer. They will want to entice you with their words. And they'll be fun. They'll be fun to talk to. They'll be fun to joke with, to go back and forth with. Is that reverb? No, it's train. Okay. But when you get engaged in that, again, they're setting the hook. Don't flirt with seducers. Don't just be friends with seducers. I don't know how many examples we could pull out of people who, they just have someone who's just a friend of the opposite gender. And then the marriage gets rough, and suddenly that just friends becomes something more than friends. There are so many examples of this that it's obnoxious, really. Don't just be friends with seducers. Don't be friends with them. Don't spend time with them. Don't go around them. Don't follow social medias of the seducers. We hear this a lot if you watch YouTube. Like, follow, and subscribe. Don't. No. Block. Drop that little drop-down menu that says, do not suggest this channel. Don't follow them. Why? Because you're letting them into your mind. And that leads us to the next point. Don't fantasize about seducers. Our mind is essential in this whole thing. And here's what happens. One of those things gets in there. You start flirting with the seducer. You are just friends with the seducer. You follow the seducer's social media platforms. And then you're thinking about them, right? And you're fantasizing about them. And you're running scenarios through your mind about them. And as a man thinks, so is he. As you fantasize, then eventually those fantasies, you want to realize them. Finally, don't be envious of the seducers. One of the tools the seducers use is to make their lifestyle look appealing. Hey, this is all the money that I get. This is the acclaim that I get. This is the attention that I get. Don't be envious of them. And this is really a important aspect for people that have low self-esteem. Because they want that adoration. They want that acclaim. They want that lifting up. And so they start to gravitate towards the seducers. But at this point, our skeptical friend might be saying, but don't I need to be in the presence of temptation to know if I can overcome it? You know, don't I need to be close to it so I can see if I can resist it? After all, what if I just go where I know they'll be, but I don't indulge? You know, I'm just going to be the strong one there, and I'm not going to indulge. And after all, I know that I'm strong enough to resist. That phrase right there. I know I'm strong enough to resist. No, you're not. Because the people that are strong, they don't go there. To answer these statements, we just got to look back at the text. He says, keep your way far from her. and do not go near the door of her house. Okay, you know where her house is. Don't go close to it. And you can imagine a person during Solomon's time, a young man saying, I'm not going to the harlot's house, I'm just leaning on the corner across the street from it. Oh, I'm not going to the harlot's house, I'm just loitering. Maybe I'll get to see her. And the father says, don't even go near her house. See, the goal is not to see if you can escape the net. That's not the goal. The goal is not to test your strength in getting into a situation and getting out of it again. The goal is to not get caught in the net in the first place. The goal is to stay so far away that that net never even puts you in danger. That's the goal. So with that in mind, let's give some more practical modern day don'ts. Don't run in the same social circles as seducers. Now, this happens pretty easily where maybe you have a group of friends that you've known forever, and maybe one of your friends starts dating somebody who falls in that category of a seducer. And you're just in that social circle. But what ends up happening? The seducer ends up doing what they do, and you get caught up in it. Don't go to places they frequent. How many times have we heard the old story? I met her at a bar, and then this, that, and the other happened. Or I met him at the club, and then this, that, and the other happened. Yeah. Because where do the people who are looking to seduce someone go? They go where people are going to be inebriated. They go where people are going to have their inhibitions lowered. They're going to go where people are vulnerable. So don't frequent the places they go. And don't attend events run by seducers. Concerts, parties, various other functions that might be being put together. Don't attend events run by seducers. There was a documentary about how some of the sex trafficking people would capture young women. And there would be an event put on by a group like Playboy or some other event group that you know what they do. And people would go to these things and then be surprised that they end up in bad situations. Don't go to events run by seducers. Don't seek the same quote-unquote experiences as seducers. Experiences are fun. There's a lot of good experiences out there, but our society has sold us the lie that there are some experiences that you have to have, that are a must. Let's talk about that just for a second. And I might step on some toes here, but so be it. Think about the quote-unquote college experience. We've probably all heard that phrase, right? Oh, I want to go to a 4-year so I can have the college experience. Well, what is the college experience? Is the college experience getting a good education so you can get a good job? If so, there's a lot cheaper ways to do it than a 4-year college. Is the college experience healthy edification by other Christians? Well, if so, there's cheaper ways to get it. For 90%, maybe 99% of the world, what is the college experience? Getting drunk and having loose sex. Oh, and there's some classes to go to also. You hear the phrase, sowing the wild oats. They're not talking about gardening. Christians shouldn't be sowing wild oats. And if a person's reason to go to a particular school is because of the culture of fun, it's probably the wrong reason. Are we surprised that so many Christian young people are sound and then they go to school and they end up in a relationship with a non-faithful Christian and they end up leaving the church? Does that surprise us? When 90% of the world goes to that experience, for sowing wild oats. And we could talk about other experiences. There's tons of them out there that people go to specifically for that purpose. Okay, so why not? Why shouldn't we seek these experiences? Why should we stay away from these venues? Why not indulge in these things? Well, Proverbs 5, 9 through 14 tells us. Keep your way far from her and do not go near the door of her house, or you will give your vigor to others and your years to the cruel one. And strangers will be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods will go to the house of an alien. And you groan at your final end, when your flesh and your body are consumed. And you say, how I have hated instruction, and my heart spurned reproof. I have not listened to the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to my instructors. I was almost in utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and the congregation. Summing up what he says there, ignoring this wisdom will lead to pain and regret. That's the result of ignoring this set of wisdom. Okay, but let's expound on that a little bit more. Let's talk about what ignoring this wisdom is going to bring about. Well, he says that you'll waste your vigor. What's your vigor? Well, it's the years of activity of your life. Your younger years, you'll waste those chasing after the seducer. You'll waste your years. Years of your life thrown away chasing after those loose things. You'll waste your money. After all, why do so many of these seducers do what they do? And a lot of times it's to get money. You'll waste your health. There's a reason that they're called STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. You realize you have a very, very low chance of getting STD if you never have loose sex? After all, you can't get them from a dirty doorknob. You waste your opportunities. Think about young people, specifically young people who are not yet married. If you want to find a Christian young person to marry, but at the moment you're running around with seducers, is that other good Christian young person going to look at you and see you as a good prospect? No, you're not. They're going to say, that's not who I want to be with. So you're wasting your opportunities. And you're ruining your reputation, it says. It says on that last verse, I was almost in utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and the congregation. See, the thing is about it, you become like the people you spend time with. If you spend your time around seducers, you eventually become a seducer. You eventually become what has damaged you. Proverbs 7, 24 through 27 mirrors this very much. He says, now therefore, my sons, listen to me and pay attention to the words of my mouth. Listen to this, verse 25. Do not let your heart turn aside to her way. Do not stray into her path. For many are the victims she has cast down, and numerous are her slain. Her house is the way to Sheol, descending to the chambers of death. You see, the best protection against the seducer is to totally avoid them. That's the best defense against a seducer. Stay away from them. Don't go close to them. Don't spend time where they're at. Because then you can never get caught in their snare. This all comes down to the fact that your own sins bring you to ruin. They bring about your ruin. And we like to blame other people, right? We like to pass the blame. But it comes down to your own sin bringing about your own ruin. So learn to exercise self-control over your thoughts and desires. As we exercise that self-control about what we think about, what we desire, what we fantasize about, then we will be able to keep ourselves safe. But that brings us to the final section of our sermon today, and that is righteous exhilaration. Because it's all well and good to say, well, practice self-control, but we as humans have desires, right? We have desires that God built into us for relationship, for intimacy. And the writer of the Proverbs understood that. So let's go to Proverbs 5, 15 through 23. And he says, drink water from your own cistern and fresh water from your own well. So he's giving an illustration here. He's giving a word picture. And the well and the cistern here refer to your spouse. So the idea here is that any sexual fulfillment should only be sought within the marriage bond. Any sexual fulfillment. Any sexual exploration should be done within the marriage bond. He goes on and he says, should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be yours alone and not for strangers with you. So water in the road is not pure or healthy to drink. You think about that, like that nasty, sludgy mud water that has like oil and all sorts of nastiness in it. That's not something you want to drink. Similarly, sexuality explored outside of marriage is filthy. It's morally reprehensible. But someone might ask, well, with so much enticement out there, how can I be satisfied with my spouse only? There was a video that made its rounds a while back. Some evolutionary scientist talking about how men evolved to need to have multiple partners to propagate the species. And so it was good for them to have multiple sexual partners. And people buy that idea. How can I be satisfied with my spouse? The writer tells us. The writer gives us a formula here for how you can be satisfied with your spouse. And this is honestly really neat. Let's look at what it says. He says, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. So the first aspect of it is intentionally rejoice in your spouse. You have to decide that you are going to be not just dealing with them, but rejoicing in them. Letting people know how happy you are about your spouse. Even sometimes they make you mad, sometimes they make you grumpy, but you rejoice in your spouse. He says, as a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. So intentionally be satisfied with your spouse's body. Intentionally decide that that is what I'm going to be satisfied with. Now, none of us are supermodels. So it's intentional. You have to decide, I am going to be satisfied with my spouse's body. And be exhilarated always with her love. So intentionally be exhilarated by your spouse. You know that whole, your blood gets going, you get kind of excited, exhilarated by your spouse. But now, our friend who's skeptical and maybe has had a bit of rough time in their marriage might say, but they're not like they were when we first met. The excitement is gone. Let's face it. I don't look like I did when I was 22. We all change. We get older. We get softer. Things happen. We're not the same as we were when we first met our spouse. And you hear this a lot. People say, well, the fire's gone. So, how do you stay excited about your spouse when you've been married for a number of years and you're not, 22 anymore? Well, you'll be excited by what you choose to fantasize about. Think about that. Let's talk about cars for a second. If you are always fantasizing about that really fancy Camaro with whatever paint job you like, and you're always dreaming about that, and then you go to your family sedan, it's got some dings and some dents, are you ever going to be satisfied with that family sedan? No, you're going to be pointing out all the ways this family sedan is not like the Camaro. Well, similarly with your spouse, if you spend your time fantasizing about airbrushed supermodels or romance books hunks, you're going to be dissatisfied with your spouse. So, intentionally fantasize about your spouse. Now, that sounds scandalous, right? I love the word fantasize. But do it. Intentionally fantasize about your spouse. Why? Because as a man thinks, so is he. If you excite yourself with your spouse, you will be excited by your spouse. He goes on, he says, for why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? I love that rhetorical question. Why? And you can see the young man maybe going, because it's fun. I've just outlined all these pain and agony that's going to come from you. And he's left going, adrenaline? Why? Why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? You see, allowing yourself to fantasize about anyone but your spouse is sin. Matthew 5:28, Jesus says, anyone who looks on a woman with lust for her in his heart is guilty of committing adultery. Allowing yourself to fantasize about anybody but your spouse is sin. So we need to learn to exercise self-control to keep our mind where it needs to be. He goes on and he says, for the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. If we understand that, that should scare us just a little bit. You see, God knows what's going on in your head. Your thoughts are not hidden from him. Just because no one else knows what's going on in your mind doesn't mean God is oblivious. He knows. Goes on and says, his own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his sin. He will die for a lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he will go astray. You see, your own sin brings about your ruin. Your own sin is the thing that brings you low. So learn to exercise self-control over your thoughts and your desires. And in so doing, you can avoid the seducer. And you can set yourself up for a healthy marriage, or in the future, if you're not yet married, you'll set yourself up for a healthy marriage in the future. So today, as we've been discussing avoiding the seducer, we've seen the wiles of the seducer, that they will manipulate you in whatever way they can to get what they want from you. We've talked about avoiding the snare, and the way to avoid it is to stay away from the seducer. And we've talked about righteous exhilaration, that we can be exhilarated with our spouse, but we need to exercise self-control to do so. So my friends, don't spend your time fantasizing about the forbidden. This, again, should be one of those things that's so obvious that it goes without saying. But don't spend your time fantasizing about the forbidden, because as a man thinks, so is he. Instead, practice exercising self-control over your desires. And as we practice exercising self-control over our desires, we'll be more faithful to God because we'll be resisting sin. We'll be more faithful to our spouse because we're resisting sin. And we will grow stronger, and resisting sin will become easier. Let's practice exercising self-control over our desires. Now today, if you have a need, this is one of those sermons that everybody dreads going up front, because if you do come up front, everybody's going to assume something. But if you have a need, we want to be here for you. We want to be here to encourage you, to help you be strong. If you're hurting, or if there's some situation in your life where you need the help of the congregation, we want to be here for you. So if you have a need, when we sing our invitation song, I encourage you to come up to the front. One of our elders will come speak with you. And if you're not yet a Christian, maybe you're watching online and you want to learn about how to become a Christian, we want to be here for you. If you're here in the room, when we sing our song, come up to the front. And if you're online watching, get in touch with us. Email, Facebook message, phone call, reach out to us. We want to be here for you. So if you have a need, whatever your needs may be, please let it be known as Patrick leads us in this song.